This is the story of how a decent girl had no money and paid in kind for a cab ride, and what came of it. The main character in this story is Masha, a beautiful slender brunette, about 30 years old, married for 10 years, 2 children. Before this story, she thought she was happily married and well settled. She lived with her husband and children in a small town. At the end of July 20s, Masha was sent on a business trip, and not anywhere, but in Moscow at the head office of the enterprise. Masha stayed on a business trip for 2 weeks. Masha soon finished her business at the head office of the firm, and the last few days she went to museums and to beautiful stores. Of course, she wanted to buy a lot of things for herself, but not much she could afford. She was a little turned on her head by the Moscow crowd and the beautiful life. Masha tells us, "I was returning from a business trip to my city by train on a Friday morning. I slept in the compartment, woke up to the sound of the wheels and the car doors slamming. I got up, brushed my hair, went to the toilet, washed my face, and got ready to leave. In Moscow, I could not help myself, of course, and I bought a lot of things, so my suitcase was heavy. But it's okay, I lifted the suitcase and dragged it to the tambour. I just need to get the suitcase to the Piran, and my husband should meet me there, I thought. My husband Vadim would carry my suitcase to the parking lot and then take me home in his car. He must have missed me. He'll start kissing me right away, or not, he'll probably buy me flowers for the meeting and give them to me first. Then maybe we'll fool around in bed, and then he'll drive back to work. And then I'll sleep at home, because I somehow failed to sleep on the train." At that moment, the cell phone beeped. I looked up and read a text message from my husband. "Sorry, I can't meet you at the train station. There was an emergency at work. There is no power in the whole shop. You'll have to get there somehow. I'll meet you at home in the evening." So he met me, I thought, with indignation. So what if he had a deadline at work? He has a work emergency every day. How was I supposed to get home with this suitcase? I really didn't want to walk with a heavy suitcase down the street to the bus in the July heat. Besides, I was wearing high-heeled shoes. I couldn't walk very far down the street in those. I could have gone to the parking lot and taken a cab. That's probably what I would have done right away. But the problem was that I had spent all the money that I had brought with me on my business trip, although I tried to save money. In Moscow, as you know, you can never have a lot of money. I had only some change left in my wallet, not enough for a cab. I sighed and went in search of a cash machine. I stood in line. I went to the machine, put my card in. Only the machine didn't give me any money. The machine showed that there was no money left in our account. I thought to myself, annoyed in the end, because when I left, I had deposited half of my salary in the bank, and my husband's salary was coming in. Where did Vadim spend all the money in 2 weeks? Was he gambling at the casino? I don't think he ever did. Maybe while I was gone, he was hanging out in bars and taking girls to his place. I thought with horror, although that had never happened before. But I did not often go on business trips before, and in Moscow even went for the first time. What was I to do now? I thought with annoyance. Should I have lugged my suitcase through the streets on foot? I did not have enough money for a cab or a private driver. I sighed, picked up my suitcase, and dragged myself past the train station to the cab rank. Whatever happens, I thought tiredly, I'll manage somehow. There were several cab drivers waiting for passengers in the sultry heat of the parking lot. I got a cab driver in an old Volkswagen Polo. When the driver saw me, a woman dragging a suitcase down the street, he dashingly pulled up to the sidewalk, jumped out of the car, and tentatively helped me put the suitcase in the trunk. Then he politely opened the door for me, and I leaned tiredly into the seat. He walked around the car and sat in the driver's seat. The cab started to leave the station as soon as possible before the driver was fined. "Where can I take you?" With a knowing smile, the driver asked. I gave him my address. The cab driver shook his head doubtfully. He must have thought the journey was too far. But he didn't mind, and he didn't charge me twice, as some people do. The driver pulled out onto the highway, and the car raced along it, past mansions and summer houses. As we drove, I peered sideways at the cab driver. He was a very young guy of Caucasian appearance with a small black mustache. On the way, the driver and I talked a little. He said his name was Artem, and I called myself Masha. I didn't want to call the man by his patronymic, even though he was about 10 years younger than me. He asked me where I went. I told him I had been to Moscow. I talked a lot about how much I liked it there, how I went to the Pushkin Museum. He listened with some irony. Then he told me that he used to live in Moscow, studied at the institute, but did not finish. Then he moved to our city and was working as a cab driver for 2 years now. During our conversation, I did not notice how the time flew by on the road, and the car arrived at my house. The cab stopped, and the driver looked at me expectantly, stopping the meter. I opened my wallet and rummaged through it for money, which wasn't there anymore. Then I looked up with regret at the cab driver and showed him my wallet. "Oh, I'm sorry. I think I lost all the money somewhere at the station," I said, fluttering my eyelashes with embarrassment, like some idiot. "Okay, I see." The cab driver sighed. It was obviously not the first time this situation has happened to him. "What is it that you, lady, spend all your money on a business trip and then get in a cab?" "Well, I had no other way out," I said honestly. I had to get home somehow. I looked around the yard with some hope, hoping to see someone from the neighbors and to ask to borrow money for a cab. But as bad luck, our yard during the day was empty, and none of my friends or neighbors I saw. So I would have to make it on my own, I thought with regret. "Well, how are you going to pay for it now?" The cab driver asked with a chill in his voice. "Should I call the police on you?" "Don't call the police," I asked anxiously. I was thinking that now I'd have enough trouble with the authorities. "Well, then let's go up with you to your apartment, to your house, and you can find the money and give it to me there, okay?" the cab driver suggested. I was glad that he took my problem with understanding and did not immediately begin to scandalize. But still, I was afraid to take a strange man to my apartment. Who knows what he might do there? And my husband could have come back from work at an inopportune moment. Although he said that he was busy there, but who knows, the rush might have already ended. Besides, I wasn't sure we had enough cash at home to pay the cab driver. If my husband had withdrawn all our money from the bank account for some reason, then maybe we didn't have enough cash at home either. The amount on the meter came out to be pretty decent. I did not expect that it would be so expensive to get a cab from our train station. I didn't often use cabs, and I didn't know what their prices were now. But I also did not want to make a scene or break a comedy in front of the driver. To tell the truth, the cab driver seemed like a nice man. He reminded me something of my husband, the way Vadim was when I met him 15 years ago. In general, honestly, the cab driver looked like the men I had always liked. I don't know how to explain it, but I had a sympathy for the cab driver. As it seemed to me, so did I in him. I smiled embarrassedly and stroked the cab driver's hand as he held the steering wheel. It was a strong, muscular arm, like a man used to work. The driver looked at me with a slight chuckle and took my hand in return. I didn't pull away, and I didn't take my hand away, though I probably should have. He leaned closer to me and suddenly kissed me passionately on the lips. I didn't expect it, but I responded just as passionately. At that moment, some kind of spark leaped in the emotional space between us. After a long kiss, he pulled away, and he and I looked at each other, he powerfully and passionately, and I a little scared. Still, I was in control. I was his guardian, and I knew what I was doing. "Let's move to the back seat. It'll be more comfortable," he said, squinting at me. "Not here," I said in response, "not in front of the driveway. The whole house is watching us. The neighbors might see." "Okay, let's not do it here," the driver agreed. "Let's go somewhere else." I nodded in agreement. My heart raced, and my breathing became intermittent. I thought the man grinned slightly into his mustache. The driver started the engine again, started the car, and drove smoothly out of the yard, then turned 2 corners. He drove until the car stopped in a blind alley, a cul-de-sac where rarely anyone passed during the day. The driver seemed to know our neighborhood since he knew the place so well. The car stopped again and he turned off the engine. There was an awkward silence. The driver looked at me expectantly. "Is this all right?" he asked me kindly. I wanted to object at the last moment, but I had no strength for that, and it seemed to me I had no other choice. Not to shout that rape, right? It would be embarrassing. Not only not to pay money, but also to set up a strange man who was not to blame for all this. I put myself in that situation. All the events of that strange day had led me to this. I thought with anger that it was my husband Vadim's fault. I dreamed that he would meet me with flowers and shower me with kisses. And Vadim didn't even come to pick me up. He had an emergency at work, you know. You should get home from the train station on your own. And he managed to spend all the money from our account on something. And my husband didn't even ask me and didn't let me know what he needed the money for. Well, I'll show Vadim, I thought then vindictively, and all the doubts in my head were instantly dispelled. I nodded confidently to the driver. I opened the door, stood up, shook off my dress, and moved with him to the back seat, where we had more room. Besides, the back windows of his car were tinted, so I was sure we couldn't be seen from the street, even if someone happened to be near the car. I sensed from him the lustful masculine desire that a man has when he first touches a woman who is new to him. I hadn't felt that urge for my husband in a long time. And what impulse from a man with whom you have slept together for 10 years and from whom you have already had 2 children? So a constant comfortable feeling of body next to me in bed, but no more. It had been starting to bore me for a long time, to be honest with you. The driver leaned toward me, breathing intermittently, and reached out with his hands. I didn't mind. On the contrary, on an instinctive impulse, I reached out in response. It was unique. I didn't even expect it for myself, how much I and the unfamiliar cab driver suddenly got it on. I wasn't upset. I was not afraid to get pregnant, as I had long ago put myself a spiral after the birth of 2 children. And I got a lot of pleasure, as well as the cab driver. He and I looked at each other again. He looked pleased. And next to him in the seat was me, a slightly embarrassed but self-possessed woman. It was time for me to go. I broke the awkward silence first. "So, do you think I've paid your fare?" I told him a little ironically. "Sure, no questions asked," he said, smiling. "No problem." I opened the cab door and stood up, straightening my dress and stretching my stiff legs. "Thank you," he said. "You're such a wonderful woman." "Thank you too, big boy," I replied ironically, smoothing my dress and fixing my hair. "Maybe I'll see you again?" he asked with some hope in his voice. He's had enough, I thought with irritation. He'd already gotten enough for the fare, and now he wanted more. "No, that's enough." I cut him off a little sharply in response. "Once we've had our fun, that's enough. There won't be another time." Really, it was like I still wanted to do it myself. But a decent woman shouldn't have gotten involved in this intrigue for so long. I'd had my fun once, and that was it. I would never let anyone take advantage of me again, I thought with the mature mind of a conscious woman. The cab driver took a deep breath, sat down on the seat, closed the door, the engine started, and the cab started moving. And I remained standing in the alley, next to my heavy suitcase. Why did I buy so much junk in Moscow? I thought with annoyance. I picked up the suitcase and staggered out of the alley toward my house. I also thought it would be strange if someone saw me here and asked why I'd come here with the suitcase. I staggered to the entrance, got the suitcase into the elevator, and pressed the button. The elevator went up to the 6th floor. I also took the suitcase out of the elevator, put it in front of the door, and rang the bell. My husband Vadim was already home, of course. His rush at work was over, of course. He rushed home then, and was waiting for me at home with a box of chocolates on the table. My husband asked me where I had been. I grudgingly snorted that it took me so long to get there because he hadn't met me at the train station. Vadim felt guilty. and rushed to hug and kiss me as if he hadn't seen me for a year. But I was kind of lethargic after the cab driver, and I didn't have the strength to respond to my husband's nervous caresses. I told him that I was very tired from the road, dragged myself into the bathroom, and stood under the shower for a long time, feeling the hot jets of water pouring over me. Then I wiped myself off, put on my robe, and went straight to the bedroom, where I lay down on the bed, telling my husband that I wanted to sleep first. Vadim didn't mind, went into the living room, and stared at the TV. As it seemed to me, my husband was sitting there a little pouty, and I lay under the covers on the bed, sobbing quietly and smiling, remembering my adventure today.
The next story is even more interesting. We'll tell you how the husband found out that his teacher wife was sleeping with students for grades at her initiative. Watch to the end. Nastya, my wife, is a businesslike and respectable woman. She works as dean of the mathematics department at a very prestigious university. We have been living together for almost 15 years. We have a daughter who is as enthusiastic about science as her mother. I myself work as an engineer. I am often sent on business trips, including those to foreign productions. So my family, sometimes I do not see for weeks, but it was not for me to cheat on his wife. I have always been faithful only to his Nastya, and I was sure that she was also faithful to me. But one winter evening everything changed. I was going on a business trip for a few days. Already at the airport I got a call from my boss saying that my trip would have to be postponed until the end of the month, and that I could go back home. And then I thought, why not make my wife happy? Right from the airport, I stopped at a flower store where I took a huge bouquet of Nastya's favorite white roses and went to her work. The time was nearing the end of the day, which means that all classes at the students have long since ended, and probably the staff and faculty members, too, dispersed. I hoped to catch my wife alone, wow her with flowers, and take her to a restaurant. I quietly tiptoed over to her office to see if any of the other staff members were still there. And if no one else was there, I hoped to burst in with the words, "Surprise, Nastenka." For the first few seconds, there was nothing to be heard behind the door, and then I reached to open it. But I heard women's moans and light rhythmic tapping. I'm not a child, of course, and I knew what was going on, but I didn't want to believe that my wife was behind the door. What if it wasn't her after all? Maybe the students snuck in and are having fun, I thought, and didn't go in, or it would have been embarrassing. I walked away from the door to the other end of the corridor, sat down on the bench and waited. After about 5 minutes, a young student came out of the office and headed for the men's room. I decided to check to see who the woman was who was moaning. As I entered the office, I found my wife in the far corner at the desk with her blouse unbuttoned. Seeing me, Nastya was very surprised, even almost fell off her chair. I stood paralyzed with my mouth open looking at her for a minute. "Sweetheart, I thought you were away on a business trip. What happened?" My wife squeaked in a frightened tone. I had never seen her frightened before. She had always been bossy, strict, confident, and here she was cowering in a corner like a mouse. From my look, I think she knew I guessed what had happened. I threw the flowers on the floor and rushed to the bathroom, where the young guy went. But Nastya didn't see exactly where I went. Apparently she thought I ran outside, because I heard her walking down the stairs in high heels from the bathroom. When her footsteps died down, I tried to come to my senses, to figure out what to do next and how to act. Of course my fists itched, but I was a grown man, and I had to pull myself together. I had to at least talk to this guy, so I yelled out, "Get out." A few seconds later, a young man came out of the last stall. He was in tears, shaking and sobbing. "Who are you?" the young man asked, wiping his tears with toilet paper. Then my fighting spirit, like a hand off. I calmly talked to him, told him that I heard strange noises from the office, and now I see how upset he was. The kid kept silent for a long time. I made it clear that I would not tell anyone, but only listen to him, as a friend, and he confessed to everything. I almost got expelled. In math, Anastasia Viktorovna failed me on the third retake in a row, although I knew everything by heart. So I told my dorm mate that last year he had the same problem in her class, and there is only one way out. To pass the exam, you need to sleep with her. Only then Anastasia Viktorovna will calm down. If I did not sleep with her, I would have been expelled from the dormitory and had to go back to the village. And I have a girlfriend who lives in this city. I love her so much. And now I don't know how to look my girlfriend in the eyes after what I did. My neighbor said it was all bullshit. I just do it and forget about it. But I realize now that I'll never forget it. The guy wanted to add something else, but he threw up right on the bathroom floor. I tried my best not to think at that moment that it was about my wife. I just tried to calm the guy down, explain to him that it wasn't his fault. He had been manipulated and left him no choice. He kind of came to his senses a little bit, and we went our separate ways. When I got home, I found my wife pacing from corner to corner of our bedroom. "Darling, where have you been? I was so worried. I looked for you everywhere. I called. I thought something had happened. You disappeared from my office so suddenly. Are you all right?" "I'm fine, Nastya, but you'll never be all right again. I know everything. I talked to your student and he told me everything. I'll report your affairs to the rector of the university, and then whatever happens." I kept my promise. I told Nastya's superiors about the criteria she used to mark her exams. I asked her not to spread this information among the students and to take all possible measures. Nastya was fired according to the article. Now she will never find a good job and she will never see my daughter again. I will not allow such a monster to raise my child. I still can't believe that I lived with a woman capable of such disgusting things. The final story for today is how the husband found out about his wife's cheating and decided to punish her horribly. See it through to the end. Victor and Emma had been married for 17 years. They got married right after high school, when they were both barely past the age of majority. By the time they were 25, they had a child, and Victor was particularly eager to grow his business. Now, at 35, he had a small chain of coffee shops in town. "Vitya, hello." The bell on the door to the coffee shop rang. Victor took his eyes off his papers and looked up at the man who had just entered. It turned out to be his friend, Leonid. They shook hands, and Victor invited him to join him for a cup of coffee. They saw each other quite rarely. After high school, Leonid went to enroll in another city, where he also found a job. "How are you doing?" Victor asked, sipping the cup of aromatic drink. Leonid told him about his work, about his new girlfriend, and that he had decided to propose to her. "You're a tightwad." Victor smirked. "Retirement is coming up, and you just want to get married." During a friendly conversation, time flew by. Autumn was deep on the calendar. For this reason, it had long since fallen dark. Vidya realized that he had hastened to end the meeting. His wife, his daughter, and a mountain of unlearned lessons were waiting for him at home. "See you later," Leonid shouted to his friend before he disappeared behind the car door. At home, Victor's daughter and their favorite pastime together were indeed waiting for him. Homework. Emma flatly refused to do her daughter's homework. "You were the smart one," she always said, pushing her husband to the nursery. "So do it, as your mother used to say to Vida, it's easy to study." His wife was a giggler and joked a lot, and a smile almost never left her lips. That's why, many years ago, Vidya fell in love with this laughing girl with 2 other pigtails on her head. In the evening, Vidya climbed into bed with Emma and immediately snuggled up with his whole body. His wife smiled contentedly and pressed herself even harder against him. These were their favorite moments. "I made an appointment for a massage tomorrow," Emma whispered. Marina recommended a great master. A cool master that a man. The wife nodded in response. She knew perfectly well that her husband would never get jealous. Not once, in so many years, had she ever given reason to doubt herself and her feelings for him. Victor said that he would leave her money in the morning for a full course, so that his wife did not deny herself anything. The next evening, Vidya and his daughter were just finishing their homework when Emma returned from her massage. Her cheeks were a little ruddy, either from the blood rush from the session or from the beginning of the frost. Emma looked somewhat lost, but overall very satisfied. Asking her about her last session, Victor made sure that his wife enjoyed it. This went on for 4 weeks. Victor wondered what a regular massage was doing to a woman. Emma blossomed and grew younger right before his eyes. It wasn't that she didn't look good, but now she was glowing as if from within. And that gave her a special charm. "I love you, sweetheart." One night, Vidya lay in bed next to his wife and studied the curves of her body. Emma looked away from the book. She looked at her husband. She smiled and affectionately rubbed his cheek. The next morning, Victor took his daughter to school and drove himself to work, asking the barista to make him a stronger coffee. He went to the farthest table and laid out the necessary items on it. Taking his phone out of his pocket, Vidya found a message from the sender with a hidden number. Something new? He thought. At that moment, they brought him his coffee, and Vidya, not suspecting anything bad, took a sip and opened the message. Out of surprise, he choked and coughed. Droplets of the drink fell on his jeans. There were only a few words and a photo in the message. The text read, "I'm sleeping with your wife," and the picture attached displayed those words. Victor rubbed his eyes and stared again. At the phone screen. Is this some kind of practical joke? The photo showed a pumped-up man and a woman. Her face was partly covered by her hair, and partly by the hand with which she covered her mouth. There was no doubt as to what exactly the two were doing in this photo. No, it was definitely spam. They want to trick me for money, Vidya thought, not taking his eyes off the picture. At that moment, he received another message from the same sender. But this time, in it was, "Just text. Do you want to see more?" Victor read it and, angry, deleted the correspondence. He finished his coffee in a gulp and was about to ask for another one, when he received another text message. "Even if you do not want, I'll still show you." A photo was written in it as well. The woman was again poorly visible. From what came into the frame, Vidya could see only the back and buttocks. Victor was very angry at these stupid messages, at the sender and especially at himself. He was angry with himself for thinking so badly of Emma. She'd never once given him any reason to suspect her of anything. The messages stopped coming. Victor gradually calmed down and the day went on. He erased all correspondence with John Doe once again. But he could not get what had happened out of his mind. At home, his girls were waiting for him. Emma prepared dinner and asked her husband to open the champagne that had been languishing in the refrigerator for a long time, waiting for him. The evening passed so quietly and homely that Vidya completely forgot about the stupid prank and the pictures of the naked woman. For a week already, Victor had received several lewd pictures on his phone every day. At first he was angry, tried to block the sender, and eventually just ignored him. On Friday, as usual, as he was closing the coffee shop and leaving the very last one, he heard the trill again, notifying him of a new message. There was a photo again. This time, he could see everything, every facial feature. The face he had been seeing for 17 years he had seen every day. It was her. There was no doubt. Emma was lying on the table. She was wearing the bra from the lingerie set Vidya had given her for their wedding anniversary. Her eyes were closed, and she had bitten her lower lip, the way she always did when she was feeling good. Only now Victor saw that the table on which his wife was lying was a massage table, and around it on the shelves were jars of oils and candles. So that's why he thought she looked and acted differently after the massage. There is an explanation. When he got home, after midnight, he found his wife sitting in the kitchen with a book open. Without hesitating for a second, Vidya walked up to her and put the phone with the picture on the screen right on top of the book. Emma went pale. She put her hand over her mouth, and Vidya heard a soft sob. "Forgive me, Vidya," she whispered. After a pause, but it was too late. For himself and Vidya decided everything back in the moment when he first saw his beloved next to another. Victor divorced Emma. He gave her some money for the first time, because his wife had not worked for a long time and lived at his expense. The daughter stayed to live with her father, deep down, holding a big grudge against her mother. Victor did not forbid them to see each other, but the daughter herself showed little interest in it. A couple of years later, the man met a new love, who he treated as carefully and reverently as he treated his ex-wife. But he was still wary of getting close. The pain of the betrayal left an early mark on his soul. And Emma herself, for a long time, was unable to start a family. Her relationship quickly fizzled out, and it was breaking up with men before she could even move in together. With no one else could she feel the same deep connection as she did with Victor. Everything was shallow and fake, and all this could have been avoided. But yielding to fleeting temptation, she ruined with her own hands what they had so long and painstakingly built. So that's the story. Share in the comments. What do you think of the situation and the behavior of the characters?